Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast, where we elevate marketing leaders inside and out. I'm your host, Veronica Rami, master marketer, executive leader, and mentor to ambitious marketing leaders wanting to advance their careers. Each episode is filled with genuine, unscripted conversations with some of the world's top marketing experts, accomplished leaders, and industry trailblazers representing brands, both large and small. Our goal with this podcast and everything we do is to help you master your role, nurture your team, prioritize your well-being, and evolve into an industry-leading Rainmaker. This is the Rainmaker Podcast. I'm going to call it right now. This is going to be easily top 3 podcast episodes I've ever recorded with the Michael J. Barber, who, yes, he's a managing director. Yes, he's an email guru. That's how I met him, is actually hearing him speak on a stage about emails with Beyonce as the through line. One of the best keynotes I've ever seen. A tribute to Beyonce and emails. So masterful. But he came on the podcast and I told him, I don't want to do a typical podcast episode. I need a vent. Can we vent about marketing? We started the podcast venting about marketing, and then we ended the podcast in tears. Had nothing to do with marketing. It had everything to do with being a human being. It had everything to do with leadership. You'll hear on the podcast his 5 must-have attributes of what it takes to be a leader right now in 2024. It's one of the best lists of leadership I've ever heard. And so you guys, please if you're driving, pull over. If you're on the treadmill, get your notes out on your phone. You're going to want to take notes. It's easily one of the best podcast episodes when it comes to leadership, being a human being, being a marketer, and having not just any legacy, but a tiny legacy moving forward. So without further ado, here's my very, very good friend, Michael Barber.
Hi, Veronica. Good to see you.
Okay. I have to tell the people because it's just too fun. We're friends.
We are.
And before we got on this morning, someone text someone, how pretty do you need me to be today? And you look fantastic.
Thanks.
But you have fabulous hair anyways and the glasses. But with that said, I also you did that to me and then I gave you a little bit of a plot twist before we push record. So Michael's been in marketing for 24 plus years, unofficially, right? And I have also been a marketer for 16 plus years since I got my fancy diploma that says global marketing on it. And we're friends. And I'm like, you know what? Can we not do the traditional podcasting? Let's just go off script and just talk about things that make us mad right now as marketers. Can we vent? Can this be like a healing session of the things that we still love, but also drive us nuts with marketing today? And you were down for it.
I'm down for it. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's start. In all of your years of marketing, how would you contrast this season, this environment, this year in comparison to the past? Is it the best of times, the worst of times? What chapter title would you give this in your book?
I'd say it's both. It is the best of times and it is the worst of times. You know, as a marketer, and you know this, having been around the block for way too many years.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting about this moment is all of the upheaval in our industry, if you will, specifically around tech, has, other than let's put AI on the side for a second, but the ecosystem of things we use as marketers, the tools, the platforms, we're in this really unique space that I don't think we've ever been in the last, let's say, 20 years, at least while I've been, kicking around the bucket, where those tools are really mature, and we're not constantly having to relearn platforms or understand when one big entity buys some startup we've been using and folded it in, and having to understand the impacts of that sort of maturation when it comes to technology. And I think that's sort of a best of times view, if you will, on what's happening in our space right now, because we're not constantly having to pivot and reinvest in different tools every single day, or understand what biggie has bought what small startup and integrated it, and what have we lost as a part of that process, right? I think also in the idea of the best of times, we are in this really fun moment of understanding where we sit as marketers inside of organizations, probably them better than we ever have done before. There's been a lot of conversations of the value of marketing, the fit of marketing, from an investment perspective. And I think a lot of those conversations, at least in my perspective, have been somewhat put to bed over the last few years in how much value brand and demand gen and marketing overall brings to organizations. At least that's my view. On the completely
10.
opposite side of the spectrum, let's go to the worst of times.
I'm waiting.
I will say the existence of what marketing will be in the next few years, or the value that we may bring, beyond this pivot moment that we're having around AI, has, I think never been greater.
Yeah.
You've touched on this multiple times over the last few weeks in the podcast, the impact of AI. In fact, you had Andrew Davis on last episode, who I know
Love
you
him.
adore, and I'm a fan
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
We have some mutual admiration there. And, he talked specifically about going to TED and seeing one of the talks on AI, and how he kind of cried and went home and thought his life as a marketer was all over. And
Licked his wounds.
yeah, and I think we've all had that moment over the past 9 to
Mm-hmm.
12 months of second guessing our life decisions of getting into this industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say it's the best of times in some respects, and I think the worst of times in other, in how we might be second guessing ourselves as the value that we bring, or at least the longevity that our careers may have. We might be thinking that there might be an expiration date and on the horizon, but I think there's probably layers we've got to pull back there to understand the true impact of what AI is going to have on our industry.
So many thoughts. Okay, so I really have been like marinating, percolating, and then like stewing on just how I feel about being a marketer right now. Because I'm in a unique position. Not only am I still exercising the craft with private clients, but I'm also in this unique position where I'm mentoring other marketers and helping them in their careers. And so I'm obviously very privy to like sensitive conversations that they're having, or the weight that they carry. So I hear them venting to me, and also having empathy, because I'm like, yeah, I know that plight very well. So, okay, the software thing. Let's go to the software thing. So I agree with you. I think if I compare a marketer to a gladiator, never before in like history do we have some of the coolest weapons of choice. Right? We have so many cool tools and just softwares and different. But now obviously with AI too, like Cast Magic, Get Munch, Discret, like there's so many cool things that like can take away hours of manual work. So that's really, really exciting. However, the con of that same advantage is this wildly unrealistic expectation that the marketer is supposed to do more with less. And I know this has always been a thing. Like I feel like marketers have always been asked to do more with less. Like that's certainly been the script that I think any boss has ever given me or I have felt. But because of the advancement of technology, it is even more of an expectation to do more with less. So I think it devalues the ideation. It devalues the things that tools can do. It devalues the art, the artistry that I feel like marketers also possess, or I like to think that we possess, because a great marketing message can literally change society and how you view the world. Like it's unreal. Like you study those campaigns in the past, like, oh my gosh. And that was because of great advertising or great marketing. And it's funny because my husband is still very much entrenched in a corporate environment. And so I hear a lot, and I'm privy to his conversations, obviously. And so we're seeing a lot of people, like, I don't even know how many people have quit, like just walked out in either a sales capacity or a marketing capacity, basically in revenue generating positions, because they have still yet to recover from the burnout of COVID, because the line between our professional lives and our personal lives have still not gone to a healthy place, even close. Like everybody, like your boss knows where you are. You work from home. Like, like they know where you are. And there's an expectation that you always have to be on because they know exactly where you are, even if you're not in a physical office. And so people that are leaving, either they're telling me in my group programs, or I'm hearing it from my spouse and other people that I still love and adore in the corporate environment. But like the burnout is astronomical. Like if all of these human beings took tests, like actual medical tests, and like we tested their cortisol levels, their adrenals, like they're shot. And I don't see any way that that's going to get better while still trying to make money for yourself and providing for you and your family. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to a broader challenge there.
Yeah.
It's a leadership issue that we're dealing with, and
Yeah.
a failure of leadership more than anything. When you look at the work that marketers and sales are doing, it is, I find, at least in my experience, as well as having conversations with other marketers who are out there, yourself included, we don't find, I think, ourselves burning out on understanding consumer psychology. We don't find ourselves, I mean, because it hasn't changed. Let's just, hot take here. It has not changed in, 100, 250 years, maybe since the beginning of mankind. But what has changed is the people that are leading us, one, and the expectations of
Mm,
what those people are putting on certain teams and certain departments. I also want to be really clear here. I don't think these challenges, whether it's sales or marketing and burnout or the expectations of revenue generating positions within the organization, this isn't just siloed to those departments. It feels like more than ever, especially in what are largely capitalistic societies, that those expectations and burnout are happening at almost all levels of organizations. It's just different for
yeah,
different
different
parts of the
flavor.
organization, right? And I also think that marketers, because we embrace all of these communication tools that are out there, these platforms, social media, etc., I think sometimes we get into echo chambers of thinking that it is just marketing that's going through this shared experience together. And it is. I don't want to devalue that. But within every operating department within organizations these days, they're being asked to do more with less. We can get into the philosophical side of what caused that, whether it is certain philosophies around economics and the
Hmm.
way organizations have to, especially public organizations, have to meet certain requirements of massive institutional investors. And for that reason, the trickle down effect inside of organizations is massive. But this idea of burnout and lack of clarity and not being able to create healthy borders of work life balance at an individual level, because this isn't, solving work life balance for leaders is not just about saying, oh, here's the cookie cutter version. It
Yeah.
is about meeting every single member of your team in a way that they feel like they are not experiencing a work life balance imbalance. It is a failure of leadership. And leading and managing is very, very hard. And most of the people that are in those positions have not been formally trained how to do it. They have really no idea how to truly lead human beings. They know how to manage teams and manage work. That is very different than leading human beings
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
being the guide or the sage of how to
Hmm.
manage the work, get the work done, and lead human beings. And we have a big failure of that layer at almost every organization. But again, I don't think this is just marketers that are facing this. I think it's a lot more than just marketers. But because you and I have such a, I think, in-depth view, and that's our echo chamber, we hear a lot of it.
Well, going back to the leadership thing, I'm gonna yes and one of my favorite like right improv rules. Yes and there's some really valiant leaders out there that are hyper aware of their contribution, hyper aware of their responsibility. That like people spend more time with them than they do their own personal families, and they take that stewardship with full responsibility. But what I even in the best situations, because I don't want to villainize this like faceless leader, what I've noticed in leadership, it's just transfer burnout from shoulder to shoulder. So the leader's burned out. So then the individual contributor beneath them is also burned out. And then the person underneath them is burned. It's just transferring burnout from one person to another. And so like I think that is also really scary if when your CEO is slacking at 2 in the morning. Like, right. So if every layer of the organization is experiencing burnout, but again, burnout, the more that I've learned about burnout, the more that I realize it's like different flavors of like the ice cream balance. Like everybody
Very much so.
experiences burnout differently. Everybody also heals from burnout very differently. Like somebody can go to a yoga retreat and that's everything they need. That like gives me hives. Like I can't just sit there and like think like I can't do it. Like I think for me, my recovery is very different that I've experienced in the past and just like sitting in silence, right? So like everybody's experiencing burnout from different pressure points and different flavors of burnout. And then the recovery of burnout is also very individualistic in what I have found personally. And so if every layer of the organization is burned out, and this is across, like you said, I definitely agree that it's across every department, every group, every team in multiple countries around the world. Like, how do we, within the sphere of influence and control that I have as a leader, how do I make a difference when it seems like it's beating a dead horse? I don't know. Like, I think sometimes I get deflated, if I'm being radically honest, that like, I don't know how to fix this. I mean, you can give wellness days. You can increase your PTO, like you, right? Besides those type of HR puzzle pieces or chess moves, like realistically, what can you actually do within your sphere of influence when you're a leader?
I think you can acknowledge it. I think you can be transparent. I think you can do all the tactical things, whether it's PTO or mental health
Yeah.
awareness or, making sure that insurance plans cover the ability to get therapy when you need it. I think you need to acknowledge it. more than anything. A lack of acknowledgement is probably something that I would imagine, and at least in the conversations that I've had, when a manager leader is not acknowledging what is occurring and meeting the team where they are and how they're feeling and providing at least some perspective on empathy, I think that's when the burnout
Mm.
feels very burdensome to teams.
Mm.
And so, an acknowledgement, a sense of transparency. I also think as a leader, you set the standard of how your team is going to feel. So, if you're experiencing burnout, part of your role as a leader manager is to create some sort of wall to not extend that feeling beyond the team, right?
Mhm.
That's what you're being paid for as a leader or a manager,
Mhm.
is to operate around some walls that may be mentally and psychologically disabling to your team. There's
Mhm.
certain information you get access to. It is not your job to, create instability with that information. If it does create instability in your mind, if it creates burdens on your team's mind, I think you've got to create those walls and those chambers that separate how you may be feeling as a leader. And if you can't get help in working through separating those different conversations between the conversations you're having upward and the conversations you're having downward or laterally inside the organization, then it's up to you to find a group of people you can have those conversations with. And for your, inside your rainmaker groups, I think that's part of the feature that you get to bring to teams and individuals, is the ability to have those conversations openly and honestly. And I think it's up to us as leaders to find places where we can have really transparent, honest conversations where we're struggling. I've been fortunate to find a few places where I can do that. And I very intentionally use those places to offload some of that anxiety, fear, some of that burnout, so that I don't drive that feeling inside of the team as, consciously.
Well, and I think that goes, okay, so everything that you're saying, yes, and to me, what you've also said is like the nature of a leader has changed. Honestly, the only thing that I can compare it to that I personally experienced is like when COVID did happen. Not only was I mother, I was school teacher, I was cafeteria lady, I was the gym, like I was like, the PE teacher.
Put every
I
single
was
label on it. Yeah.
I was all the things to my children that they were getting from like, 5, 10, 15 people in their sphere. And I had to become all of those things for my child because it was a complete shutdown and isolation in my home. And so like our dining room table became school and this became PE and this like right, it was just everything changed. If I look at how I managed gosh, when I was like, 2016, 2015, and how I manage today, 2024, I am multifaceted to even be equipped to handle the demands and the needs of my beautiful human beings that I'm responsible for. So, like, yes, learning more HR tactical things like you shared about, right? But also, like, I can't tell you how much money and time that I've poured into like psychological development of myself, like doing my own therapy, doing personal development, professional development, because the best leaders now are not just leaders by title, but leaders by motivation, by coaching, by mentoring, by holding space. Like, I've had to become so many things to be a really effective leader because not only am I responsible for my contribution, I'm now responsible for their individual contribution at a larger scale. And to even come close to being equipped to help them in their different seasons of need. Holy crap. I've had to I've had to shore up my own personal and professional resources to even come close to being equipped to helping other people. And that wasn't given to me. I've had to invest in all of that on my own time, my own money to do that effectively so that I can even mentor other people, let alone coach my own staff. So I think the nature of leadership has had to also change. Like my husband just became VP, he got promoted to VP, and not that he wasn't a manager before, but like even in that new leadership jump, he's like, my identity as a leader has had to change. All these things that I was wildly uncomfortable doing, now I have to do. And I have to figure out how to gain that skill and mastery on my own hours outside of my 60 plus that I work a week. I'm like, oh. So the poor guy's
Yes.
like doubling up on everything. He goes to the gym and
Yes.
he's working on his physical body, which is great, but he's also got a podcast in his ear about like sales leadership. Like he's like trying to optimize every little nook and cranny in his schedule to take on that extra requirement of being a successful leader at that role.
I mean, I think we're getting at a broader point here, and I
Yeah,
don't mean to be blunt. Well, I'm going to be blunt and honest.
I love it.
Number one, leadership is not for everyone.
Yes.
Leadership is not for everyone.
Say it again.
We have, unfortunately, because of a sense of time and positions, experience,
Mm.
we have equated that metric to, oh, this person is ready to lead. They are ready to go to the next level in their career and have responsibilities for people, et cetera, et cetera. That just isn't the case. Just because you have experience and you've done the job well tactically does not mean you're going to be a good leader.
Oof.
And the other biggest challenge here is that there's almost no training that's happening from a leadership perspective in most organizations.
Yep.
There are very few these days, whether you look at the big F100s, the Fortune
Yep.
100s, all through, mom and pop, that have true leadership training programs in them.
Mm-hmm.
It's non-existent inside the agency world. It's almost non-existent within
Mm-hmm.
the marketing, being on the brand side of the
Mm-hmm.
marketing house inside of organizations. Sure, there is incredible training opportunities at the tactical level, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
devaluing that or saying that that's not an incredible investment for teams to make or leaders to make for their team members. But there's no path for leadership. There's no, this is how we're going to invest in you. This is how we're going to make you a better leader, a more well-rounded leader, to be able to have those more personal conversations with team members and show up how you are. There's plenty of books out there, and there's plenty of mental health or psychological, therapists out there that can help you, take that path. And there's plenty of external resources that can help people
Mm-hmm.
become a better leader. But for the case of your husband, Scott, is his name correct?
Yes.
For the case of Scott, he's doing what a lot of us have to do, which is we are taking on the learning and the growth to become a better leader in our off hours. We
Yes.
are investing in ourselves because we want to be a better leader. And I
Yeah.
don't, my sense is that recognition of I need to step up my ability to lead people is not something that most leaders reflect on. I think they think it's
Mm-hmm.
just in them because they've been doing this for so long. And I
Mm.
want to say right here that I think being really a really good tactician, it will make you an incredible leader, but it's not going to make you the best possible leader that you can possibly be. It's not going to help you show up for people how people need to be shown up for right now in
Mm-hmm.
2024, having gone through what the world went through over the last couple of years and is currently going through as we speak. There's only so much knowing the work gets you. You
Yeah.
have to invest in understanding people's psychology, understanding how you show up for people,
Yeah.
understanding your emotional intelligence or lack thereof, and being okay to acknowledge it. You have to understand how so many facets of human psychology to be a true and present leader for people. And I don't think we're acknowledging that. We're not investing in it. We're not training people in it by any stretch of imagination. And too many leaders should not be in the positions that they're in.
Little mic drop, sizzle mic drop moment. Hey Rainmakers, it's Veronica, and we'll get back to today's episode. But before that, I have an exciting invitation for all of you aspiring, ambitious marketing leaders. If you are serious about advancing your career in marketing and you're looking for an expert to give you some personal insights, guidance, tips, then I'm going to invite you to schedule a free Pathway to Promotion call with me. This is a special one-on-one call with just you and me to discuss your current roadblocks in your career, your long-term aspirations and ambition, and the next best step for you and your personal promotion. Head to pathwaycall.com or click the link in my show notes to schedule your free Pathway to Promotion call. Now back to today's episode. Okay, so let me ask you this. If you had to conjure the perfect ingredients of leadership that can meet the moment of today and the future, you've mentioned empathy. You've mentioned radical awareness, not of just self, but of other people's own achievements and struggles. If you had to conjure the perfect ingredients of a leader today, what would be on your list? Top 5.
You really know how to do the work. Number one, you are a tactician. I firmly believe that no good leader doesn't understand the inner workings of how the work gets done.
Amen. Yeah.
Number one. And I know people can have it out with me on that because I think that there's some incredibly good strategic thinkers out there, and I'm not devaluing strategy or strategic thinking, but I think the ability to do the work
To do it.
and understand how it's done is a top 5 trait of a leader right now.
Oof.
I think number two for me, I'm sorry, and I may put these in order of, I'm not putting these in
It's fine.
any order of importance. It is just sort of what, conjuring up those top five. Number two, an understanding of what's happening culturally,
Okay.
cultural resonance. And
Oof.
I'm going to tell you, that I get this in a very two specific ways in my life. For all intents and purposes, I often interact with leaders who will say things to me like, oh, I would never be on that platform, or I wouldn't watch that show, or you watch that? That seems weird.
Judgy, yeah.
Yeah, I think to be a good leader, you have to have an understanding of what's happening culturally within all the major age groups that you're serving as a leader. So on my team, I have elder millennials and I have Gen Z. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Two wildly different groups of people with wildly different attributes and wildly different working styles. But I've focused my efforts on understanding culture in two places.
Okay.
One, I adopt new platforms pretty easily. Like I may not be a contributor, but I'm a lurker and I'm a watcher in a lot of these places.
Love it.
Whether it is understanding what's happening within, TikTok or what's trending in certain places, right? Being if you will, a viewer of what's happening culturally, I think is really helpful for me to be a good leader for a couple of reasons. One, I think, relatively more approachable when I can have conversations of what's happening culturally.
Agreed.
I think you drop barriers of an us versus them mentality inside of teams when you can relate or be like, oh yeah, I saw this really funny thing on XYZ platform, right? Or hey, I saw this like trend that y'all are into. Like unpack that for me. Like how is even that a thing? I don't understand it as this like white 40-plus-year-old man and operating in this, new age world that I don't understand. So I think cultural resonance and an appreciation of what's happening culturally amongst the team members that you serve.
Can I back you up on that? I'll give you a fun example.
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
So I love Ted Lasso. I've seen all 3 seasons multiple times. I'm a big fan. Some seasons are way better than others. Anyways, besides the point. My husband has not. But do you know like the Believe
Yes.
poster that's like crooked?
Yep.
I was telling him how much I loved it, and they ripped it, and then they brought it together. Like I just blah 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 what I do as one does with your spouse. He purchased it like on Amazon or whatever and stuck it behind him on his wall. Mind you, he's not a fan like I am, but he put it on his wall. And his sales calls like, oh, I love Ted Lasso. And his employees, oh, I love Believe. Like unreal how much you put yourself out there and you just put yourself out there. And he has gotten so much social equity out of it.
Yeah. It drops barriers, creates conversations.
Yes,
it creates moments of, true connection amongst your team. And I think that's important because when you have those moments and you can acknowledge these interesting moments in culture and shared experiences, your team can operate from a place that is more transparent and authentic and from a place of trust like it hasn't done before.
Agreed.
So tactician, cultural resonance, you and I have hit on this over this conversation, but this idea of empathy, it gets thrown around a lot. And I'm not necessarily saying this is groundbreaking information, but the ability to empathize with your team in moments of big challenges or in moments of small friction and say, I've been there. This is how I handled it. Or, you know what? I don't even know what to say here, but tell me what you need to help you through this moment. Or I might not have the words. Or, hey, you've got a sick kid. Like step away for the rest of the day. There's nothing pressing that's happening. Like just the work's going to continue to get done. The meat's going to continue to get processed. Like take the time you need to do the things to be able to bring yourself, as much as you can back to your workspace and be productive, and providing that empathy in very real and tangible ways and always. And I say that you can show up empathetically in a variety of facets, whether it's through a one-on-one or the way that you help lead your team through projects, or empathy can be an understanding of like what's actually important, but what actually isn't. Because I find, the leaders that overemphasize the things that aren't important are showing a complete lack of empathy for their team. And so that empathy can be shown up in, I think, in a lot of different ways. But empathy, so tactician, cultural resonance, empathy. I think in in an area where people, number four, in an area and an environment, especially in remote and a hybrid experience,
Mhm.
you have to lean into transparency as much as you can.
Oof.
And this is a tough one because as a leader, again, we've just talked about like having to silo certain conversations and,
Yep.
not allow certain information that you are privy to impact the rest of your
Yep.
team. But to a certain extent, if you're feeling it, they're probably feeling it. If they're not hearing it from you, they're probably hearing it from someone else in the organization. And so, as a leadership team, you need to decide what is the level of transparency that we are going to allow within our organization. Are we going to be radically transparent? In other words, everyone's going to have access to the books, everyone's going to know the P&L, everyone's going to know what our investors are saying and what they're not saying, or are we going to be tight-lipped, right? And what's the spectrum that you're going to allow transparency to occur on? But I want to say this: in the absence, there's this. If you've seen the movie, I'm gonna show my age here for a second.
Okay.
But American President, which
Okay.
has Annette Bening and Michael Douglas in
Yes.
it,
Yes.
and basically the plot line is Annette Bening and is a lobbyist. Michael Douglas is the president. It was sort of the
Single
single
president.
president precursor to the West Wing,
Yep.
if you will. Aaron Sorkin wrote it as well, I believe. I could be wrong on
Mm-hmm.
that, but I think he wrote American
Mm-hmm.
President as well. He's in the middle of a race against what you believe. You don't hear the labels of conservative or liberal,
Mm-hmm.
but you think Michael Douglas is the liberal candidate, and
Mm-hmm.
the individual who he's running against is the conservative candidate, and the conservative candidate is saying some pretty inflaming statements.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Douglas doesn't take the bait. He won't take the bait. He talks about it in the metaphor of like a mirage. If people see the mirage, like the water in this desert where everything's dry and they're dying of thirst, they will see the mirage. In the absence of a story, in the absence of understanding what is happening, they're going to make up things to make themselves feel better.
Yep.
And if you don't tell them something, the story that they're making up in their head is probably worse than what is happening in reality.
Worst case
And
scenario.
so I think we have to, in these moments of really challenging times, lean into transparency as much as we can. But it needs to come from a place of, I'm telling you this because this is where we're operating from, versus creating fear. So if you are going to tell a team something that is potentially seen as very negative, you also have to come back and do the yes, and here's how we're working towards solving it. And
Yep.
here's when we plan to check in with you to tell you what's happening. And if you
Yep.
have any questions, here's how you ask those questions: publicly, privately, one-on-ones, an anonymous Q&A, whatever it may be. But you've got to, in the absence of the story that people are telling them in their head, come to them with at least as much transparency that allows the business to operate and people not be more fearful than what they already might be during a
Mm-hmm.
really challenging moment.
Do you know where I feel this the most? Because yes, and to everything you just shared, where I have felt this transparency tension being a mid manager, meaning I'm not the top of the top and I'm not the bottom, like I'm in the middle. So to your point, I'm receiving information from the top and then I have to discern what the bottom can like comprehend or what doesn't make them feel scared. And then vice versa, like knowing my timing when those that report to me are in turmoil, how much do I disclose and when do I disclose it to people above me? So like being in the middle is really hard because you have to use an enormous amount of emotional intelligence, maturity, and discernment to know when to share what to who. And it's hard. And that's why they go like, oh, politics. I'm like, I don't know if it's politics. It's just, just making sure that you're not going to upset the system more so. But where I have found the tension around transparency sometimes the hardest is shortly or right after somebody leaves the company.
Yes.
That's when it acutely becomes aware to me, because what happens is, especially if they were somebody beloved, an A player, or they've been there forever. Like think about it, right? Somebody's leaving, and what's the company going to say? Are they going to be honest? Are they going to tell us what happened? Why? And to your point, in the absence of knowing the specifics of what went down, the individuals that are left are going to be really they're terrified. It's psychological unsafety. Like they don't feel safe. And the 5 love languages, they added 2 new ones last year, and one of them is emotional security. To be loved is to feel emotionally secure, but to be in a relationship of any kind, whether professional or personal, you want to be also like emotionally secure to do your best work, right? And so when good people leave, or beloved individuals leave the company, it's that panic around by others that are like, what does this mean for me? Why would they leave? Do they know something that I don't know? Do they know something that I should know? If I knew what they know, would I also leave? Like, right? That's hard, because when somebody leaves, I also want to respect their privacy. And how you talk about somebody when they leave informs the next person how you're going to talk about them when they leave.
100%. Yeah.
So that one's always been a really delicate moment where transparency is very hard to execute, even though I find myself to be somebody who is very transparent, very honest, and integrity is one of my core values. But those are moments in leadership where they're hard for me.
Yeah, it's tough. We just had someone on our team who was an
Yep.
A player leave,
Yep.
and he left because he wasn't getting what he needed from us. And
Right.
we've acknowledged that. I think that's what you have to do, is say, this individual left because, we couldn't execute on X, Y, and Z. And
Mm-hmm.
here's how we're going to try and fix it. And we may not fix it. But
Mm-hmm.
we've learned, and at least you understand why
Mm-hmm.
that individual has left, and that there's
Mm-hmm.
no story that's being made up. Because as Michael Douglas alluded to, if people don't have a story, they're going to make up their own. So tactician, cultural resonance, empathy, transparency. The last one for me is courage. Courage is a requirement.
Love it.
My friend Ryan Berman, who wrote this book called Return on Courage, has my favorite definition of courage. And I'm going to read it because I'm terrible at memorization. So forgive me if I'm looking
Okay.
off to the side.
You're
But
fine.
courage is not about recklessness, but about taking calculated risks and making principled decisions in the face of challenges.
Oof.
I think maybe the biggest single thing that's missing from almost all leaders is courage.
Mm-hmm.
Courage to say the right thing, courage to do the right work, courage to, when they do something wrong, admitting it, courage to, when they hire something wrong, they admit it, courage
Mm.
to be okay with doing the wrong things and saying the wrong things, and the courage to also tell the story of all the good things that your team or department is impacting inside the organization. The courage to take the risks to invest in something maybe that you don't understand. I mean, good Lord, coming back to a conversation we've just had around AI,
Yeah.
it's a terrifying chasm that's happening in our business, and basically every other business for that matter. And you have to have the courage to lean in and go, I'm going to, as Drew alluded to in your last conversation with it, to like lean into this abyss of what feels awful and unknown,
Yeah.
and learn from it. Another person you've had on your podcast, Jay Bear, was my first boss out of college. And on like day one or day two, Jay said to me, if you aren't learning, you are dying.
He was
And
your boss?
he was my first boss out of
How do I
college.
not know this?
Yeah. Yeah, I went
That's so cool.
Jay was I got to go do an internship at his tiny little agency
Uh-huh.
between my junior and senior year in college.
Oh, so cool.
And Jay said, "Hey, you want to come work for us when you're done?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And this is entirely an aside, but in the spirit of being transparent during this conversation, I was so hungover for my graduation that my mom had to drive my U-Haul from Tucson, Arizona to Phoenix so that I could move in the next day after graduation and work for Jay's agency the day after that. Because he was like, you need to start on this day. And I was like, great, I'll be there. And I was in no shape to drive myself. So my mom, who was not planning on doing this,
Way to go, Mom.
drove me from my, waking up groggily in the morning the day after my graduation, my college graduation, and drove me to Phoenix. And I started at Jay's agency the next day.
Oh, that's so crazy. That's
And
so
Jay
cool.
said, if you're not learning, you're dying. And I think that is, a courageous act that a leader can do, is constantly be leaning into learning. And it doesn't mean you have to be an expert, but you got to know where all the parts fit, and you got to be willing to like stake a claim.
Yep.
And you got to be willing to be totally wrong about that claim.
Yep.
And so for me, tactician, cultural resonance, empathy, transparency, and courage, those are my top 5 in a leader.
Okay, just so people that are listening understand, I didn't ask you this question ahead of time. There was no preparation. You literally just wrote a list.
Right there.
Of 5 that was so profound, so amazing. I want to give full credit of what you just did on the spot.
Thanks.
Michael, that's so. Anyways, okay, well, and I fully. You're not a presidential candidate, but I fully endorse everything that you just shared, because even the first one, what I share with my marketers is like, even if you get to a position where 80% of your work week is leading and strategic, thinking and people management and road mapping and all of that. I still want you doing 20% of the work because I don't want you to lose an edge on the craft itself. And I also want you to know enough to still remain dangerous that nobody can take advantage of you. No vendor can bullshit you. Like think
Yeah.
about all the advantages of still having a pulse in the trenches of the doing that you would lose if you were too good or above that
Hmm.
anymore, which I think sometimes you'll see in more prominent positions. So I just fully endorse everything that you just shared. And it's probably easily one of my favorite podcast episodes that we've ever recorded. Just, I'm being meta with myself. This is so good.
Well, thank you.
So we saved the last question for the guest to ask me whatever they want and put me on the spot because it's only fair. So what would you like to ask?
What scares Veronica about Veronica? What scares you?
Oh man. I have two fears or two moments at the kitchen table that I've been, what am I doing with my life?
Existential.
Yeah. Okay, so you know how you were saying not everybody's meant to be a leader? I would also say not every vision is meant to be legendary.
Yes.
So I work with a lot of incredible visionary CEOs. And this is, I mean, I'm nervous even sharing this, but I'm just gonna say it. But like I've worked in high proximity, very close proximity with a lot of visionary CEOs that have a lot of conviction behind what they're doing. But if I'm being radically honest, sometimes I'm like, that vision isn't meant to be Walt Disney World one day. So, with that said, though, when you are a provider or a consultant or a strategist and people are employing you, and I'm again like integrity is everything for me. And so there was this moment where I was working for somebody in a full-time capacity that I could tell my personal values weren't aligning with the values of the owners. And I had this moment at the kitchen table, and Scott came home from the gym, and I'm like crying. He's like, "What in the world? Like, what?" Because I'm not that emotionally driven, so like that's rare to find me just crying randomly at the kitchen table at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, I'm the one that makes the golden calf that the people worship. I'm the marketer that makes the false idols. Like I just, like this was also shortly after like Rachel Hollis with her whole thing about like the
Mm,
woman that cleans my toilets.
yes.
And my friend I had a really close friend in Arizona that like read her book like a Bible. And, when she was like, every September, me and Dave have sexy September and we're like intimate every day of September. And I'm like, that's a pretty, I mean, if people are trying to emulate that, that's a high task. And my friend was trying to emulate this, what she thought was a really great marriage. And
Yeah.
she couldn't last all of September, for heaven's sakes. And she was really down about herself. Now, fast forward a couple of years, they get divorced, and unfortunately, Dave has passed away from his own internal demons.
Yeah.
But like when you're in a position as a marketer to bolster some of these individuals up, you're like, oh, what am I doing here? Right? Is this the greatest work of my life? So I've had those moments that have been really hard.
Yeah.
And then I've had the existential crisis of like, because I have a podcast, I'm on social media, I'm doing the song and the dance, and so have I accidentally become the thing that I was worried about in the first place? Like,
Mm,
and so I've told my husband, I'm like, somebody take me out back, like put me out of my misery if I ever lose my humility, if I ever become the machine and not the human. Like, I would like to think that those people that I've had issues with in the past were human at one point, had the most sincere heart to serve and to solve people's problems or take people out of suffering or whatever. And so, at what point along the way did they sell out? And they didn't even realize, that's the thing, they didn't even realize that they sold out
hmm.
on their values, on their ethos. And so that terrifies me because I don't think that they were aware that it happened until it was too late, and now they're too into it. And so like I never want to lose me, you know? So sometimes I still fantasize about like shutting it all down and like having a bed and breakfast in the Greek islands like Jason Bourne did at the end of the first movie. I don't know, like just like screw it. Like, so yeah, that if I'm being really honest, those are the things that I've had to have those conversations with my spouse and like, please hold me accountable because I never want to lose me.
Yeah. I think you're touching on something that's a tough realization for us all, but something that I feel like I've journeyed through the last couple of years is that I think a lot of times when we start our careers, we have this, for me, and I think for you to a certain extent, it's like, I want to be that CMO.
Oh
Like that
yeah.
was where my North Star was. And I want to leave this big impact and
Oh
legacy.
yeah.
And for me, where I've settled and become really, really comfortable. And it's brought me a lot of joy in my life. And I said this to someone a couple of weeks ago, and I finally feel like I put it into like words. It's like, I'm okay with a tiny legacy. If my legacy is my family, my friends, the few people that I've been able to work with over a hopefully 30, 40-year career, and that's the only people that I've impacted, I'm okay with that. I don't need the big title. I don't need the big legacy. And I'm getting a little emotional because one of our dear family friends passed yesterday, and I'm just remembering that he was really good at like understanding a tiny legacy was more important than anything. And I think all of us can take a moment, take a breath when you're in these moments of challenge and thinking that you're, not creating this big legacy that you're building or that you want to build, that it's okay. Life is okay to build a tiny little legacy.
Gosh, I wish we would give ourselves more permission to be like, I'm good enough. My contributions are good enough. Because how much time do I spend, if I'm being really honest, where I tell myself I'm not good enough. I'm not a good enough speaker. I'm not a good enough mother. Add any title you would like. And
Sure.
we spend an enormous amount of time telling ourselves that it's not enough. And what a reframe, Michael. Holy crap. And actually, it is enough. Tiny legacy. That should, if you ever were to write a book, what a title. Tiny legacy. I actually love the juxtaposition of that. Oh man. And thank you for sharing about your friend and sharing their memory on this podcast. That's very sweet.
We went from one extreme of ranting about the industry to tears. So I feel like, you know what? If anybody tuned in, you got every facet today.
It was a full show. It was a full show, emotions everywhere. And we did it looking fab.
We did. We look pretty.
Yeah. Bring it back to the top.
Exactly.
That's what good speakers do. Anyways, I adore you. You know that. I'm so grateful for our friendship over so many years. I'm so grateful for this conversation. It's definitely one of the more transparent, honest ones that we've ever had. And it was a long time coming. We've been wanting to do this for some time. So thank you for being on the podcast. Where would you prefer people to reach out to you to tell you how awesome you are?
You can reach out at michaeljbarber.com. I'm pretty much there or anywhere at michaeljbarber. And feel free to call or email, send a carrier pigeon, and I will reflect the thanks and the gratitude as well. Our calendars were challenging, but yes. I'm glad we finally made this happen, and it was so worth the hours, the wait and the hour to get to spend together. I deeply appreciate the conversation, my friend.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you again for being on today's Rainmaker podcast. Thank you for joining us on today's Rainmaker podcast. Marketers help other marketers. So if there's a marketer in your life who could really use a new perspective in a way that helps them advance their career, please pass this episode forward, share, leave us a review. Everything helps as we embark on helping as many marketers elevate themselves inside and out. You can always visit veronicarami.com for today's show notes, additional links to some free resources and tools for you to help you advance your career. You can always connect with us on social media at @ViaRami if you want more behind the scenes or a way for us to connect personally. Until next time, my friends, make it rain.